This is every level of the World Cup explained. Level 1, the weakest ever. These aren't players who had one disappointing tournament, missed an important penalty, or made a mistake that cost their entire country a match. These are players who look like if you got a random guy off the street and put him up against some of the greatest athletes on the planet. Things going this badly have only really happened to one person, Mwepu Ilunga. Ilunga represented Zaire at the 1974 World Cup. This was the first time a country from sub-Saharan Africa had qualified for the tournament, and it went about as badly as possible. Zaire lost all 3 matches, conceded 14 goals, and scored none. The second match was a 9-0 defeat against Yugoslavia, which remains one of the largest losses in World Cup history. But Ilunga became famous for something even stranger. In Zaire's final match, Brazil was awarded a free kick just outside the penalty area. While the Brazilian players were getting ready for the referee's whistle, Ilunga suddenly sprinted out the defensive wall and kicked their ball back into their own field. The reason for him doing this is because his team had been losing so badly that they had been told by the Zaire dictator that if they continue severely embarrassing him or lose by more than 4 goals, they'd all be killed. Even with that pressure of life or death, they still ended up being at a score of 3-0. But because of the time delay and confusion Mwepu had caused the Brazilian team, he and his teammate got to go home and see their families. Level 2. Average. Average might sound like an insult, but these are guys who are professionally trained, technically skilled, and the best in their country. But compared to the entire tournament, they're nothing memorable. A good example is Riyad Mahrez. Calling Riyad average sounds ridiculous when you look at his overall career. At club level, he reached heights most footballers could never even come close to. When Riyad entered the 2014 World Cup as a talented but relatively unknown winger, he started Algeria's opening match against Belgium, but Algeria lost 2-1 and he was dropped from the starting lineup. Without him, Algeria beat South Korea 4-2 and drew with Russia, and reached the knockout stage for the first time in the country's history. Mahrez returned as a substitute against Germany in round 16, but lost 2-1 after extra time. Not once did he score or assist. He was simply a good player occupying a normal position on a competitive World Cup team. Very average. Level 3. Deep World Cup run. As strange as it sounds, Harry Maguire is a perfect example. Maguire has probably been mocked more than any defender of his generation. There are compilations of his mistakes, endless memes about his speed, and entire stadiums of opposing supporters who celebrate whenever he receives the ball. But at the 2018 World Cup, he was a completely different person. Maguire started every single important match during England's deepest run in 28 years. He won headers, carried the ball out of defense, and became one of England's biggest threats. Then, in the final against Sweden, Maguire rose above the defense and smashed a header into the net, resulting in England winning it 2-1 and advancing to the semi-finals. Maguire was now 1 match away from being a World Cup final. England eventually lost to Croatia in extra time, but Maguire had gone from a relatively unknown Premier League defender to one of the biggest breakout players of the tournament. He then returned in 2020. At the time, his club form had collapsed. He was losing his place at Manchester United, and supporters were questioning why he was even being selected. And many expected him to become one of England's biggest weaknesses. Instead, he was again one of the most reliable players. He helped England keep 3 clean sheets, created a goal against Iran, and produced one of the biggest performances against the United States. England reached the quarterfinal before narrowly losing 2-1 to France. Level 4. One-time World Cup winner. This is basically every single professional footballer's dream. For one tournament, they survived the group stage, every knockout match, and the final without being eliminated. But then, rather than just being a random member of the winning team, they were the face of it. Mbappe was the face of France's win in 2018. He was only 19 years old and playing in his first World Cup, but he already looked faster and more dangerous than almost every defender trying to stop him. Against Argentina in the round of 16, Mbappe produced the performance that made him famous. He won a penalty after sprinting through Argentina's midfield, then scored twice as France won 4-3. In the final against Croatia, he scored again, becoming the first teenager in half a century to score in a World Cup final. France won 4-2 and Mbappe had become a world champion before even turning 20. Level 5. Multiple World Cup winner. Winning one World Cup can happen during one perfect generation, but winning multiple World Cups means surviving different tournaments, different opponents, and sometimes completely different versions of your own national team. Cafu did exactly that. He is the only player in history to appear in 3 consecutive World Cup finals. In 1994, Cafu began the tournament as Brazil's backup right back, but then Jorginho was injured during the final against Italy and Cafu was sent onto the field. Brazil eventually won on penalties and Cafu became a world champion. 4 years later, he was the starting right back as Brazil's return to the final. For most players, reaching 2 consecutive finals would already define their entire career. Cafu came back for a third. Brazil won every single match they played. In the final against Germany, Ronaldo scored twice. Brazil won 2-0, and Cafu climbed onto the winner's platform to lift the trophy. That image became one of the most famous celebrations in World Cup history. Cafu wasn't Brazil's biggest star. He wasn't scoring hat-tricks or dribbling through entire defenses, but his consistency is what made him so valuable. Brazil changed between 1994 and 2002, but the whole time Cafu remained. Level 6, World Cup legend. No one represents this level more than Pelé. Pelé arrived in the 1958 World Cup as a 17-year-old dealing with a knee injury. He didn't start Brazil's first 2 matches, but by the end of the tournament, he had produced one of the greatest introductions in football history. He scored the winning goal against Wales in the quarterfinal. He scored a hat-trick against France in the semi-final, and then he scored twice against Sweden in the final, including a goal where he lifted the ball over a defender and finished before it touched the ground. Brazil won 5-2 and Pelé became the youngest world champion in history. He returned in 1962 and scored in Brazil's opening match, but an injury ended most of his tournament. Brazil still won, giving Pelé his second title, and in 1966 he was repeatedly fouled and injured as Brazil was eliminated in the group stage. Afterwards, Pelé became so frustrated that he considered never playing another World Cup again, but then he came back in 1970. Now 29 years old, Pelé was no longer the greatest teenage prodigy. Even better, he was the center of what many consider to be the greatest international team ever assembled. Brazil won all 6 matches. Pelé scored 4 goals, created chances for almost everyone around him, and assisted Carlos Alberto's goal in the final. Pelé had won his 3rd World Cup, something no other player has achieved to this day. Level 7, greatest of all time. These are the players who are so great that a World Cup trophy is no longer the thing that is used to measure them. Their entire careers changed the way football is played, watched, and understood. And for this level, it's mainly Cristiano Ronaldo. Probably to the surprise of everyone watching who doesn't watch football, Ronaldo has never won the World Cup. Ronaldo first appeared at the tournament in 6 as a 21-year-old winger. Portugal had reached the semi-final, their deepest run since 1966, and Ronaldo scored the first World Cup goal against Iran. He was Portugal's captain. By 2014, he was carrying a team that had become heavily dependent on him. And in 2018, at 33 years old, he produced his greatest World Cup performance. Portugal faced Spain in their opening match. Ronaldo scored a penalty, forced an error from David De Gea, and then with Portugal trailing 3-2 late in the match, he stood over a free kick just outside the penalty area. He curled it over to the wall and into the top corner. Hat-trick. 3 goals against one of the strongest teams in the tournament. At the 2022 World Cup, Ronaldo scored against Ghana, becoming the first player to score at 5 different World Cups. But that record is only one part of the argument. Ronaldo has won 5 Ballon d'Ors, putting him among the most decorated individual players ever. He also won the Champions League 5 times and remains the competition's all-time leader in goals, appearances, and assists. At Real Madrid, he scored 451 goals in 438 competitive matches. He averaged more than a goal per game for 9 whole seasons, and despite spending much of his early career as a winger, he also finished as the Champions League's leading scorer in 7 separate seasons. In the knockout rounds, where the strongest teams face each other and every mistake can end the season, Ronaldo repeatedly became more and more dangerous. He didn't build those numbers in one league or one system. He won league titles in England, Spain, and Italy. He became a superstar at Manchester United, reaching a statistical peak at Real Madrid, and still scored more than 100 goals for Juventus after arriving in his 30s. Then there's Portugal. Ronaldo became the most capped player and highest scoring player in the history of football. And on top of that, he didn't inherit a team that regularly won major trophies. In fact, Portugal had never won one before him, but with Ronaldo as their captain, they won Euro 2016 and the Nations League. That is the argument for level 7. Pelé has the greater World Cup record, but Ronaldo produced elite numbers across more teams, more leagues, and a longer period than almost anyone in football history. That's what makes him level 7.